So hi everybody, this is Joan Tabachnik and welcome to our March webinar, NeuroPress webinar. I really want to say it's always exciting to see how much interest there is in these topics, and particularly for this topic, which I know is near and dear to a lot of people. I also really excited to see how many people are calling in from really all over the US and Canada so far. So I'm just always fascinated to see where people are coming from. So if you're just joining us now, if you want to just practice typing in just where you're from, and also if you're listening on your own, that would be great. So we've got some from Monticello, Iowa, and Holyoke, Massachusetts, Seward, Nebraska, and Winter Haven, Florida. It's great to see everyone. Thank you. Or see everybody in words. For those of you who don't know about NeuroPress, our mission is to share the cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. And our focus is on work with children and adolescents with sexual behavior problems. But we cover a whole variety of issues around sexual abuse. And what makes us unique is that we're professionals who work in the field. And so we hope that that our learning will be shared. We're always looking for ways to share our learning. And for many years, we sold only books. And the last 5 years, we've begun to offer online courses as well. The newsletters that take a research article each month and puts it into an easy-to-read newsletter. And now, most recently, these webinars by some of our internationally recognized authors. We hope that you'll consider becoming a sponsor. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in our webinar. In terms of just, a little housekeeping, want to say that because every kind of workshop you'll ever go to, there are learning objectives. And so I want to give a chance to just tell you about what our learning objectives are, which is to introduce basically all of you to the range of neurodevelopmental delays that are often exhibited by clients with behavior and learning problems. The second, we want to share examples of how these delays specifically impact a client's abilities to learn, relate, and self-regulate successfully. And third, suggest some ways to remediate some of these problems. Second, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, you'll find that on the NeuroPress website, and just go to www.neuropress.org and look under free webinars, and you'll see both this PowerPoint as well as a recording, which will show up next week. So we will send you a notice about next week to let you know when that recording is up if you want to listen to it. And third, just when the workshop is over, can you please be sure to close out your account? And when you do that, we'll be sending you an evaluation. And we really, truly appreciate your feedback. So if you can take a minute to fill out that evaluation, it would be great. And again, we'll be sending you a link to the recording as well as to a certificate of completion after next week after this is over. Also just say that we are now offering 1 CEU credit for each of these webinars for $5, and all you have to do is go onto the Orlando Behavioral Health website, and there's the link right there on your screen, and you can again find that on the NeuroPress website. I also want to just take a moment to introduce our really, really wonderful speakers today, and I'm really thrilled to do so. Penny Cunningham currently works at NERI as the Director of Brain-Based Learning and the Resource Center, and she also trains and consults to special education programs as well as residential settings throughout the country. She's been working in the field of regular and special education for over 30 years and has written a number of books. NeuroPress has published 3 of them, Try and Make Me, which is Power Struggles, as well as co-wrote with Shannon, who's our other presenter today, Smoothies for the Brain, brain-based strategies to diffuse behavior problems, and the Brain Detective. It's a practical tool for helping misunderstood children and teens. What I love about Penny, she's a lifelong learner, and she has a doctorate from UMass, a master's in teaching from University of Chicago, and an MSW from University of Connecticut. Shannon Shabbat currently also works at NERI as the Developmental Movement Coordinator and is part of the brain-based team, where he works one-on-one and in small groups to address a whole variety of things, for example, such as delays in gross motor and fine motor, sensory and muscle tone and strength changes. His work at NERI also allows him the opportunity to consult with multiple special education programs throughout the state, and has also authored those same books with Penny. So really welcome to both of you. And for those of you who don't know about the Brain Detective, this is an easy-to-use tool that helps assess possible brain-based problems. It's a great, easy-to-read booklet, and by looking at a child's behavior, it provides you a tool to identify possible neurodevelopmental obstacles to communications and learning. But furthermore, the booklet explores these brain-based keys, and how do you make changes to lead to both more successful teaching, parenting, and treatment outcomes. And right now we're doing a special offer that for $5, including shipping and handling, you can order that by calling our toll-free number. So give us call Neri Press if you're interested in buying that book on the special deal. So I think without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Shannon and to Penny, who are going to do a really wonderful, succinct 30-minute presentation here.
This is Penny, and I'll be starting out. I want to be sure that the slides are here. Yes? I'd like to begin with a question that we all hopefully ask ourselves periodically. When a client won't do what you ask, refuses to complete the work, fidgets constantly, spaces out, wants to move around all the time, or forgets what you tell him over and over, how do you usually respond? How do we usually respond? I believe we often see these behaviors as an attitude problem, some kind of emotional resistance. However, it may not be. The resistance may be brain-based, not based on a choice just to be difficult. The term brain-based refers to the findings in neuroscience research made in the past 30-plus years that provide us with some new lenses through which to understand our clients. With the advent of brain imaging tools like MRIs and PET scans, we can now watch what's happening in the brain as well as where, as we carry out a task both in a particular moment and over time. This research has resulted in evidence or brain-based practices focused on the underlying reasons for behavior problems, as well as how the brain learns and regulates best. This in turn means we as professionals can improve the effectiveness of our treatment work immeasurably by both incorporating the brain's rules for optimal learning and self-regulation, and organizing what we do with those rules in mind. Now, there are different components of brain-based intervention that one can focus on. One of them is related to strategies to engage and motivate our clients, like making a tactile or whole-body game out of an assignment or task. Next, there is the area about assessing your client's learning or communication style when studying something difficult or under stress. As examples, after assessing a particular client, you might find that this person is able to participate more fully in the class or counseling session if he can move around while you talk, or be provided with visuals or pictures to accompany an explanation or concept or required skill. We can also alter the physical environment, like allowing clients to read material in dim, not bright light, or in a room that's cooler than normal. I myself need both. After I assessed what worked best for me some 12 years ago, I found I was much more productive when I could work in a room with dim light and the heat lowered. Now, another area of brain-based research is addressing cognitive weaknesses, like clients' poor short-term memory, or a client who needs mental structures like color-coded lists or step-by-step instructions to make sense of what you were sharing with them. And last, there's the component related to neurodevelopmental delays. This is the one we're going to focus on today. Now, to begin, we define a delay as a gap of variation or impairment in the way a child or youth's brain and nervous system are growing that can affect both learning and behavior. There can be many causes, but the result is still the same, an impairment in the brain's functioning as the child matures. Among hundreds of other brain-based researchers, Dr. Carla Hannaford, a neurophysiologist and educator who's written a wonderful book called Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in Your Head, that explains in depth how thinking, relating, and regulating originate as processes of the brain and body. From the moment we're born, our body's early reflex and sensory systems play a major role in our eventual ability to manage our emotions, control our impulses, and perform well, whether in treatment, school, or even on the job. Early stages of brain development need to be completed at least partially before our higher functioning capacity, our cortex and those frontal lobes, can be fully activated. As many of us know, each stage of growth builds on the last. If a stage or skill is missed, it will affect later stages and functioning too. Now this makes sense, common sense, but still many professionals assume their clients have the cognitive capacity to participate fully in treatment work, that they can manage their emotions if they want to, make choices, solve problems, and recognize cause and effect. Kevin Creedon, in an earlier webinar related to our topic, calls this erroneous assumption working from the top down, because actually it's the other way around. The ability to make choices occurs in the frontal lobes, the last to develop. But the good news is neurodevelopmental delays can be remediated because the brain has plasticity through our lifetime. Research has definitively told us that our intelligence is not fixed, that we can change the brain and even jumpstart the expression of new skills. Now, why is knowing about developmental delays so important? First, I think it gives us ways to work on the underlying issues from the bottom up. It expands our perspective on the motivation behind acting out, and it depathologizes our work. Barring a physical issue, we also no longer see a negative behavior as necessarily a volitional decision, a purposeful resistance, or the desire for a power struggle. Of course, what we see is still real. The client is being defensive, but what is different could be the why. Further, we can make a difference. We can begin to affect change with these new tools and strategies, and we can use them directly in our work. We do this through our teaching role. Remember, no matter your job, teacher, counselor, therapist, even administrator, you are conveying information, a body of knowledge or a set of skills. You're also setting boundaries and teaching better ways to manage emotions, to problem solve and relate to other people. And you must constantly motivate and engage your clients. These are primary things teachers have to do too. With this new research, we have been given the tools to both identify potential gaps and intervene directly rather than relying on specialists alone. We have been making assumptions about underlying causes for behavior all along, often with no research to back up what we do. But now our assessments can be more systematic and provide immediate strategies as possible solutions. For example, we often assume working with a group in a circle, or talking a lot to clients, or having them even write in a journal is best. But that's not necessarily true for some. Some clients need to balance group time with time to study independently, work quietly. Others with poor writing skills or auditory processing problems need to work from a computer or read the material rather than just listen to a lecture. Still others need visual cues to remember what is said, or a slower pace, or what we call wait time before being required to express themselves in the group. While some interventions do require sophisticated and specialized training, many don't. You can become a brain detective and then, based on what you find, make recommendations to others, or in some cases alter what you do. Shannon will now share some specific examples of neurodevelopmental issues you can address, how deficits in these areas impact on behavior and learning, and how to intervene in new ways. Shannon?
All right. So thank you, Penny, and hello to everybody. Thanks for joining us. I think a good place to start is with some examples of the types of behaviors you may see in your client, which could be the result of this neurodevelopmental delay that we've just introduced you to. So noticeable behaviors could include constant moving around, difficulty understanding reading materials, needing repetition of instructions numerous times, or a client saying they understand when they don't, or even an overreaction to noises or like subtle sensory experiences. In addition, you may see darting eyes, an inability to write easily, or very sloppy penmanship, and slouching in chairs and at tables. I know in our experience, these behaviors are indicative of neurodevelopmental issues or delays combined with survival strategies that clients develop to compensate for these delays. All right, so how do we normally interpret these problems? More often than not, these behaviors are interpreted as attitude problems, unwillingness to pay attention, oppositionality, and or maybe a lack of motivation. So let's take a couple of these delays, the behaviors that accompany them, and the actions we can all do to help remediate the identified problems. Okay. So Penny began this discussion by introducing you all to a possibly new, but definitely, at least in my opinion, a different lens of looking at your client's behavior as the result of underlying or developmental delays, rather than the more traditional lens of cognitive functioning or psychology. So this new lens reflects a brain-based approach, which builds upon where your clients are developmentally using screens and assessments from many areas. What I'm going to do is explore this a little bit further by providing two examples of the multiple areas in which developmental delays can occur. As you can see from the slide, there are a number of areas or lenses to look at when figuring out what is going on with your client. Deficits in any of these areas impact on behavior, ability to gain knowledge, and affect ability to self-regulate. But given the time restraints of this webinar, I'm going to be talking only about the first two areas, reflex integration, more specifically the Moro reflex, and the next one on the list, which is auditory processing. All right. All right, so, but I do want to take a moment to briefly define the other areas listed. Third on the list is vestibular balance or functioning. What we are talking about here is the vestibular system, which is located within the temporal bone and including the inner ear refers to our balance center. It is this system that determines our relationship with gravity, whether we're moving around or sitting still in a chair. This system also helps with the location of sound, enabling your clients to turn their heads in the direction of the sound or to locate conversation. Now, a student with vestibular problems or delays may appear constantly irritated or dysregulated. They may have difficulty focusing and be unable to pay attention. This can mimic ADHD, but it may actually be a vestibular problem. Next on the list is interhemispheric imbalance or midline. Now, the midline refers to an imaginary line that divides our bodies into right and left sides. In order to be able to read and move, clients need to be able to cross this midline. By doing so, both sides of the brains are able to communicate. If you can't cross the midline, you will have the extreme difficulty comprehending reading assignments. Your eyes may not be able to track from left to right when reading, which could cause your client to lose their place. And also your client may appear clumsy and become frustrated with organized sports or physical activity. In each of the last few areas, I will define there are also observable behaviors and learning issues associated with that deficit, but for purposes of this webinar, I'm just going to define the last few so our language becomes a little more familiar to you. Let's begin with gross motor. All right, gross motor refers to the ability to complete coordinated actions using the large muscle groups in such activities as creeping, crawling, and walking. Fine motor refers to the ability to complete coordinated actions using the small muscles of the hand and wrist. Now what you do is you complete tasks such as clasping a writing instrument or picking up small items. Vision refers to the eye's ability to work together, or eye teaming. Also the ability to track, which means the smooth pursuit of the eyes like you would do in reading from left to right. Another piece of that is saccades, which is switching between objects, and accommodation, which is looking from near, such as down at your desk, and then up at a board, which would be far, and then back to your paper. Last on the list is sensory integration or processing. Now, this refers to the client's ability to make sense of auditory input, visual input, touch, movement, and energy modulation is in the same area as this self-regulation. It refers to the how and what your clients do to modify behavior. It creates almost a sense of inner calm. Now, one thing I want to note is these areas do not exist independently of each other, so therefore deficits in any of these areas can be a result of deficits in many areas rather than just one, so they kind of intertwine. If you want some further exploration of these behaviors, please check out our Brain Detective book. And on to the next. All right, we're going to move on to primitive reflexes. Reflexes are defined as an involuntary response to stimuli and are the beginning of motor control. We are born with these involuntary movement patterns. These patterns appear in infancy and disappear as the child is in motion and learns new skills. So typically a child is born with well over 100 primitive reflexes. These reflexes include the blink reflex, gag, yawn, cough reflex, the rooting and sucking reflex, and the grasp reflex. That's actually pictured above in the slide, the little hand grabbing onto the finger. Through reflexes, the infant learns about neck and head motion and equilibrium. And it's the stimulation of other systems, like auditory input, visual input, tactile or touch. These work to help provide feedback and eventually help integrate reflexive patterns. So for example, as a child begins to crawl towards an item or a person, the rug that the child is crawling on provides sensory feedback. The eyes are working to locate the item. The child may be listening to the sounds of their parent's voice or the noise of the toy they are seeking. The information provided by all these various systems together, they help train the brain to eventually no longer need a reflex to assist with movement and body control. But these initial reflexes are critical to early survival. Reflex integration happens when primitive reflexes can no longer control what one's body does. The complex interaction between the motor and sensory systems, it allows the reflexes to become integrated. When a reflex is retained or not integrated, that's when the client can build on faulty patterns and have inner experiences that affect everyday life. Reflex integration enables a client to perform everyday tasks like hold their head up, use correct posture, or even grip a pencil. In the next slide, we're going to explore this Moro reflex a little bit more. So the Moro reflex is just one example of a number of the reflexes that can be retained or unintegrated. A retained reflex can be due to a number of issues as very early due to things such as trauma, neglect, abuse, or environmental exposure. I've chosen the Moro reflex because its lack of integration creates inner experiences and behaviors that mimic the fight or flight. This response is often created by trauma experiences. Now with the fight or flight, you have something called a startle response. Now this response is present from birth. It actually appears in utero and typically fades within 3 to 4 months as the brain matures. So what happens is, as the newborn is startled due to a sudden or unexpected loud noise, for example, or when there's a sense of falling, the response is an extension or flailing out of the limbs, the back arches, and the fingers curl as if to grab onto something or someone. Doctors actually check the health of a newborn's nervous system they hold the child's head in their hand, and there's a slight dip in the neck, and the child responds. And the responses vary between fight, flight, or freeze. So the response is not purely muscular. Within moments of the threat or stimuli, an organ in the limbic system, called the hypothalamus, acts reflexively to meet the biological needs, releasing hormones and causing changes in the autonomic functions of the body. The hypothalamus activates the sympathetic nervous system, which heightens emotional arousal. Another organ within the limbic system is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala learns from experience, so it is able to detect a signal or a threat, which appears to be linked to past painful experiences and happens to trigger the startle response. So in thinking about a client with trauma, understanding that a retained Moro reflex could be contributing to their experience is critical. All right, so what does a client with a residual Moro reflex look like? Clients with a retained Moro reflex, how they're going to appear to you is it will seem as if they manipulate people in situations in order to maintain some control, to feel safe. They are routine-driven. There appears to be a discrepancy between verbal and emotional and social situations, causing problems with peers. They can appear fearful and at times overbearing. Now, the Moro reflex has a very strong connection to the nervous system. Reactions tend to appear heightened, almost like an overreaction for which they have no control. You may have seen every one of these in treatment. And the first behavior on the slide, which says is hypersensitive and overreactive to certain stimuli. This stimuli could be something subtle, such as a change in light or temperature, to something more heightened sensations, such as touch, stress, changes in routine, sudden or unexpected loud noises, and exposure to other triggers. The second behavior appears to have difficulty controlling body movement or accurately perceiving spatial environment. Your client may appear clumsy or hesitant navigating up and down stairs, walking, or participating in physical activity. Your client may bump into things or people and appear unaware that this just happened. They seem almost oblivious to their surroundings. This may come across as risk-taking. And the final behavior on this slide exhibits insecurity. We're talking about sense of self or feeling of safety. This may present as low self-esteem or poor social and emotional skills as well. Got some mic feedback there. All right, just a few more observable behaviors. Getting stuck on that one today. Exhibits general anxiety or fearfulness, has poor adaptability or dislike of change. Remember, the Moro reflex is a response to our fight or flight system. If your client has this retained reflex, they're going to appear always on edge, looking and feeling anxious and fearful of anything from new people to new environments. So you can imagine how constantly being in this state of alertness could cause your client to want to gain the control back. For many, routines and sticking to predictable schedules gives them some sense of control. When this is taken away, your client's reaction appears quite dramatic. So let's talk about some next steps. Research suggests that supposed automatic responses of the nervous system could be controlled through self-awareness and self-regulation. Penny mentioned this a little bit earlier in the slide. What this is it requires the learner to pay attention or be mindful of their internal sensations and emotions. Acknowledge that, yes, there is emotional pain, but it cannot hurt me. To lessen the startle response, clients who are able to recognize the sensation itself, and this will enable them to quiet the response and make sense of how their bodies are reacting. There are other activities that you could recommend to directly address reflex integration. Many of these interventions are now common within the trauma treatment world. Lesser known, however, and more resonant with neurodevelopmental constructs are, if we look at the first one, rhythmic movement training. Now, this training is a specific set of exercises which helps to establish head and neck control, regulate muscle control. It helps to form the foundation of posture. So that means you're engaging the abdominal and back muscles to be able to sit up and not slouch and move around. And also to stimulate the frontal lobes in order to improve attention and impulse control. Next on the list is core exercises. Now these help strengthen the abdominal and back muscles, which is important for stability and control. Third on the list is yoga. I'm sure many of you know it is a series of poses or positions designed to promote things like flexibility, increase muscle strength, address muscular imbalances, and of course create calm and regulate our nervous system. And finally, there are a number of specific reflex integration exercises that directly address reflexes. The common thread here is that by engaging the body in these interventions, you may strengthen the mind-body ability to self-regulate, whether due to trauma or retained Moro reflex. Okay, let's move on to auditory processing. Auditory processing is the ability of the brain to interpret the sounds we hear. It focuses on what we do with what we hear. A person could have perfect hearing but poor auditory processing capacity. Where hearing is a different kind of skill set. Hearing is the faculty or sense by which the sound is perceived. There are several different ways the brain processes auditory information. This includes auditory discrimination, which is the ability to identify specific sounds related to certain objects or people. Auditory figure ground is another one. This is the ability to attend to important sounds in the environment and ignore other sounds. And also auditory sequential memory, remembering sounds or messages in the order in which they are given. This is an important skill, obviously, for language development, following directions and reading. So why don't we take a look at some of the behaviors. All right, what does a client with auditory processing problems look like? Let's take a second and go over these. I'm just going to read them through if that's okay. Misunderstands or needs repeated oral instructions or questions. Says, huh, and what, at least 5 times or more per day. Has a short attention span. Is easily distracted by background noise. Speaks in a monotone or loud voice. Shows delayed language development. Shows difficulty with tasks requiring auditory sequential memory. Has a history of hearing loss and/or infections, and shows a strongly sensitized startle response to sudden noises. Now take a moment to think about a client you have who has exhibited some of these. What may have come across as avoidance or refusal may in fact have been due to their inability to interpret and understand what in fact you were saying to them. Imagine someone giving you multiple driving directions and road conditions really quickly, expecting that you understood every word, and then have that same person get upset with you because you did not arrive at your destination or you went the wrong way. Knowing that an auditory processing issue is a possibility could be a game changer for some of your clients. It is possible for your client to have fine hearing but have an auditory processing issue or disorder. So if your client had a hearing problem alone, that would warrant further medical intervention. If your client had both a hearing and an auditory processing problem, the hearing problem would need to be addressed first. If a receptive or expressive language issue emerges, a speech and language evaluation might be appropriate. And if after testing a central auditory processing disorder or CAPD is discovered, a client might need to receive special supportive therapy, a reading or auditory enhancement tool, or other supports. Clients should obviously be tested for both hearing and auditory processing problems. Okay, With that said, there are a number of things that you can do right now that can impact this. Why don't we take a look? Depending on the age of your child, whoop, I went a little bit too far. Depending on the age of your child, a good first step would be to talk with them about your observations. So this could mean just sitting down together quietly in your working space and bringing your attention to sounds in the environment. Notice, is there a buzz from the electronics? Are there noises from the other rooms? Things like that. Together, figure out the comfort level or even the level of distraction of these noises. What adjustments can be made? And then provide opportunities that help your client cope with an auditory problem. Provide practice of listening, repeating, rhythm games, sound recognition patterns, music, or things like Simon Says. I'm just going to take a quick moment and explain the items on the screen here. So number one, auditory stimulation program. Sorry, we're getting some audio. So an example of this is the listening program. And the listening program is a music-based auditory stimulation method that trains the brain through specialized music. It trains the brain in auditory skills to help the brain effectively listen, learn, and communicate. There are other things out there, but I wanted to give you just one example. Next on the list, sound amplification or sound reduction devices as needed. An example of this is an echo or a whisper phone. Now, this is basically a small device that sits on your computer and has a small tube resembling a headset that amplifies sound. The client would be able to hear enunciation of each word or sounds and hear their own voice. Third on the list is a longer wait time. And this is exactly how it sounds. Wait longer than you would normally for a response. Give them time to process, to really hear and interpret what you're saying. And then we move on to visual and tactile cues. Visual cues can be instructions that are written down, things that are labeled. Tactile cues could mean manipulatives or a brightly colored schedule with things they could touch and move around. And then the last on the list is environmental changes. And this is as simple as it sounds. Turn off the radio, AC, and make the work environment free of distraction and sound. All right. So we are going to move on to, all right, it looks like we are out of time, so we'll have to stop here. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of other areas of neurodevelopmental delays that can impact on learning and self-regulation. Hopefully this webinar has provided you with an introduction to these important perspectives.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Shannon, and Penny as well. It's great. And I love my favorite comment so far. Like there was a little bit of sound problems. What I love was that someone said that they were having some sound problems, sort of ironically. So I thought that was great. So what I want to do is to take a few minutes to sort of take questions from the audience, and just to let you, to let other people, I know we've gotten a couple questions already, and just to let people know that if you do have some questions, please, let us know. And I think also that people are still writing in that, I guess let me know if you're still having some sound problems, and if you can hear my voice clearly. I know that we've been working behind the scenes to clear some of that up. So maybe just to begin with, just the first question is, you've covered so much in this, and I know that there's a lot of questions coming in, but what are some of the different kinds of sort of calming tools that one can use with the client? So I think that, certainly to be able to work with the client, that's probably the first step. So do you have any suggestions here?
Sure, I can answer that question.
Sure, it can be as simple as just
finding a quiet space to sit, silent reading or journaling.
So Shannon, they're getting an echo, so it's hard to understand. Is there somebody has their speaker on now in their computer?
Does anybody have their speaker on their computer? There's some feedback.
I'm using Shannon's. We had to switch, and Shannon's using mine. La la.
All right,
Sorry.
and maybe we want to take. So should we just like skip the webcam part then? Okay. All right. So can you turn your webcams on too, so people can also see you? I think that'd be great. We'll see whose face shows up. I see Penny's. Yes, Penny, and your names and faces are lined up. That's great.
You see
Thank
both of
you.
us?
I do. I can hear and see
Okay.
both of you. Okay, so Shannon, try again.
Okay, so the question was
Okay.
about some
So
calming
the
tools
question
that you
was
use. This could be
about some
something
calming
simple
tools
as
that you can
finding a
use.
quiet space, sitting down, journaling, reading quietly, and then the next level
From that would be repetitive movement. It could be rocking, it could be walking, it could be spinning. Music is another calming tool. Some of our students, and I know
for myself, enjoy like tactile like stuff to fidget with or to touch. That can be very soothing. A couple more. I don't want to hold up too much time. Weighted body blankets, weighted vests, therapy balls to sit on.
Great. No, that's wonderful.
Also, can you hear me?
I can. There seems still an echo still. I don't know if
Oh dear.
um,
Well, I was suggesting tone of voice.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Tone of voice.
Try
Move
scooping
over.
a little bit.
Okay. And facial expressions make a difference. They can often calm somebody down. And I think both of those are related to what are called mirror neurons, which is a fairly new area of research that talks about how when one person speaks, gestures, smiles in a certain way, neurons actually fire in another person's brain. So that just by changing your countenance, you can affect how someone else's countenance shifts.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. So another question that came in. So many of us sort of work with, so this, I'm reading their question. What is many of us work with trauma and see some of the symptoms that you describe, as this Moro reflex possibilities. Can you say a little bit more about how these work together? So trauma
Sure,
and the Moro reflex.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's not an easy one to answer because it's not about, I don't think the importance is whether we differentiate between the two, unless, say, your client has a clear history of trauma, then you would want to look at that. Or if there wasn't trauma that was obvious, the first step, I think, would be to look at the Moro reflex, since they kind of mimic each other. So if trauma does exist and the symptoms relate, then you might want to combine trauma work with some of the reflex integration stuff that I talked about, or some of the self-regulation, because there's a strong connection there between the two.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Penny, anytime you want to jump in with if you have other thoughts, just please feel free to jump in. I don't mean to cut you off here. Another good question was, what are some of the ways that we can alter the physical environment, sort of as one of the brain-based strategies that you both talk about so often to address some of the neurodevelopmental delays?
Well, particularly if you're working with younger learners who tend to be more global, lowering the lights and asking them if that works makes a difference, so even with older students too. Turning the heat down or turning it up, providing different kinds of seating arrangements, both comfortable and straight chairs and desks some people like to sit in, or maybe not desks if you're in a counseling session, but different choices for seating. We actually have a classroom where there are 6 or 7 different kinds of seats children can choose from, including a beach chair. So you can play with this with kids. And of course, you only use these environmental supports provided the children respond positively and attend more as a result in the treatment work. There's so many of them.
Yeah.
There's the use of music or no music. There is providing food and drink or not for students or learners or clients who don't want them. Can you all think of any others?
No, you did well.
Great. Okay, great. So I'm getting one question that keeps coming in from a couple different ways is that like, for example, one person asked, like, how many signs need to be seen in order to suspect auditory processing problems? And I think conversely, another person asked sort of a similar question, which is that they've been working with a client and basically that some of the, as they've been reevaluated by the local special ed people, they said that there was no longer a central auditory processing problem. So it seems like there's a difference here between what people see is like when you see maybe one thing, it's maybe not considered a processing problem, but if you see multiple ones, and how would you look at a situation to say, like, how many signs are needed in order to suspect some sort of problem or processing?
Well,
auditory.
In this booklet we wrote, we have a list of auditory problems or potential symptoms that you can identify based on your observations, and we suggest that you have to have at least 4 or 5 of those symptoms before you take the next step. You don't have to. Depends also on how strongly these appear, how often. But we suggest you need a number of them, and then you might begin by talking with the child, observing them over time, and then going to talk to a professional in that area. We have students who've had auditory processing problems who, in their past, who've come here and a specialist has said they no longer have these problems and we think they do, or vice versa. So I think you need a number of different tools to use to assess these youngsters and do a lot of observation and talk to other professionals.
Great, thank you. Do you want to add anything? Shannon, did you want to add anything, or are you good with that?
No, I agree with everything you said, yes.
Well, she is your boss, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Right. So here's another question. So now that basically someone was saying now that she's learning sort of all these different ideas, and some in particular said like the Moro reflex was like a real like new learning for her, and she was excited about that. So
awesome.
But someone said it's making her a little bit overwhelmed with what to do next. Can you make some suggestions about how to sequence this? How to think about what is the next thing you would do if you're with all this new learning?
Well, we've actually talked about this question a little bit. It's come up over the years, and it's a common reaction to have. It's very natural to be a little bit overwhelmed, or, oh, this is new. All this new information that really is language that specialists have been using and not we until recently. So it's common to have a kind of, oh boy, reaction. Shannon and I certainly did when we started to do this work some 13 years ago. I think that you need to start slowly, and you need to do something that makes you feel comfortable. Either read something, go talk to a specialist in one of the areas, an OT or speech and language person, kinestheologist, or read the reports more carefully, and then our book, which gives you some suggestions as to how to begin to identify behaviors that you see. Do you all want to suggest anything else?
I don't think I can. I'm not sure that I can hear it. Can you hear me?
So Steve, we can't hear you.
Steve's here in the room too.
Yeah, they can't hear you, Steve.
Okay, just borrow his.
He's going to borrow my headset for a second. Hold on.
Hi, Joan and everybody. I'm sorry to insert myself into the conversation. Steve Ventus from Neary. Shannon and Penny were immersed in this world for years before I came to the table. So I had that same response in terms of, am I misinterpreting, signs and symptoms as being psychological or, somehow attitudinal or behavioral when actually they're neurodevelopmental. And so that reaction of, and what do I do now? I actually think that the most wonderful thing that could come out of this is that you have an response, that you just have the question pop in, maybe, I wonder if, could it be? that this is a Moro reflex? Or could it be that this child has an auditory processing problem or a neurodevelopmental delay? So really just asking the question and being sort of a detective in that way is the first step. I mean, we made mistakes for years in so many ways, and you know what you know when you know it. So it's more like we're introducing, or Shannon and Penny are, a whole different world to all of us. And I found it to be a game changer in terms of a paradigm shift for me about how I look at kids and the questions that I'm asking. So the first step for me is to just ask the questions and then be a little bit curious about finding out the answers. I mean, sure, we put in the plug for Penny's Brain Detective book. That would be great, but there are other places to look in terms of online, workshops, just the way, anybody got into this field years ago. You just start and you keep putting one foot in front of the other and don't worry too much about making big mistakes.
We also listed out a bunch of resources at the end of this webinar for you to see, and there are wonderful books that are easy reading in each area. For instance, in the area of reflexes, we use Athena Oden's Ready Bodies, Learning Minds book. Is that it?
Yes.
Ready Minds, Learning Bodies, something. And that book, just reading that book alone, introduces you to the major reflexes and how to begin to impact on them as a professional. So there are easy to read resources that are becoming available based on this research, and we can certainly suggest some of those to you if you want to contact us.
That's great, and also just let people know that that the PowerPoint that Shannon and Penny used is on the Neary Press website, and then after the conclusion page of the PowerPoint, you'll see just a page. At least I think there's like 3 or 4 different pages of other references and citations there. So I think people will find that really useful. So I would really suggest after the webinar's over, or if you're online right now and have access to that, just go to the Neary Press website, look under free webinars, and or right on the homepage right now, you'll see a link to that PowerPoint presentation. And I think we have time for sort of one more, and I just I think in particular that one question I find really moving is just that it's like, if you have any suggestions on working with both parents and children have had extensive trauma, and how can we help parents understand that their child's brain functions if the adult brain has also been impacted by trauma. And I'm wondering, I know that you've done a lot of work with both parents and the kids, and I'm wondering if you maybe just speak about how do you translate some of this fairly complex ideas to parents who might be concerned about their child.
Well, what's interesting is when I've shown the booklet Brain Detective to parents or adults, they often immediately start self-assessing themselves and saying, oh, that's me. Oh, do I have an issue?
Okay.
So many of the same materials can be used for both groups.
That's
Do you all
great.
have any other thoughts about particular differences? I don't know. Do you, Shannon?
For
with our
addressing
work with
trauma?
adults?
I think a big step, and I hope this is relating to the question specifically, is just taking a step back and observing. I think if we're going to impact whether it's trauma or these neurodevelopmental delays, we need to get a sense of what the reality is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in working with whether it's adults or whether it's with kids, figuring out what their reality is like, and then from that, what sort of assessments and tools do we need to help get them to something that can help?
Well, and I think there are 3 major brain-based principles that parents and other professionals can use to begin to affect trauma. One of them is creating a safe, relaxed environment, wherever that is. The second one is providing opportunities for clients to immerse themselves, to become active participants in whatever learning you are doing with them. And last, it's to give them a chance to speak, to process, to talk with them, to give them a voice. And that's called active processing.
Great. Thank you both.
Principles, I think, help too.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you both. And I just want to take a moment at the end here to just remind people that not only that we both the first that we put together this monthly newsletter, and once you sign up for webinar, we'll automatically sign you up for this newsletter as well. I think you'll find it very useful, but you can always unsubscribe. It's very easy. You can how to do that. Just a few housekeeping reminders to say that that again the PowerPoint is posted, and also by next week we will be posting recording of this webinar as well, and send you a certificate of completion. So just be patient with us, and by next week you will have all that information sent to your email box. I also want to let people know that we do have other webinars coming up, and the next webinar is with Robert Kinshroff, and it's looking at a developmental perspective to sexual abusive behaviors. Also, we could not do this without without the support of our sponsors. And I just want to first do a huge shout out and thank you to our sponsors, and also to say that that if you are interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact us directly at either info@nearypress.org or call us directly. You can find information on our website. And when you do become a sponsor, we send you copies of 2 of our popular books of current perspectives and current applications. And for individuals, it's $98, and for organizations, $250. We not only list you here, we guarantee you a spot. So in some of our more popular webinars, you actually are able to be guaranteed that you'll actually be able to attend it live, and we can. And then just to give a quick shout out here, the United Methodist Family Services, St. Joseph Orphanage, the St. James R. Reynolds, Central New York Psychiatric Center, the Durham Family Court Clinic, the Center for Clinical and Forensic Services, the ITM Group, and Branch Airlo Society. Last, I just want to thank both of you, Shannon and Penny and Steve, for your guest appearance or your cameo here. Just really, this was a really invaluable, I think, webinar, and I know both of you were really unsure about the technology here, and I think you did a fabulous job. So thank you both. And also thank you to our audience. Please remember to sign out so that we can send you the feedback form, and we hope to see you next month on the developmental perspective with Robert Kinshroff. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.